Without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Jeff. So this is the fifth installment of our Traction Process Associates webinar series. So for those of you that don't know, Traction Process Associates is myself, Beth Fahey, and my partners Clark Neuhoff and Renee Boer. We're certified EOS implementers working in the greater Chicagoland area. So our guest today is Jeff Galas. Jeff Galas is an award-winning sales coach, strategy consultant, speaker, and author who likes to set sales in motion. So with a foundation of sales and consulting, he discovered small business owners in the professional services kept finding him. And after working hand in hand with these enthusiastic entrepreneurs, Jeff followed his own advice by taking the leap to start On Purpose Growth in 2013. So he is an expert in the sales industry, and we always like to expose our clients to people that can answer their tough questions better than we can. So he's got a lot of great content here to help you. And again, we'll leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. So in the meantime, if you could please mute yourselves for the duration of Jeff's talk. We'll open up the mics at the end of the Q&A. And so with that, Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate it. One of my rules, though, as we jump in here, is that today we're all beginners, including myself. So feel free to ask questions. Feel free to interrupt if I speak a little too quickly. I think we have a reasonably sized group that if I skip over something or you have something pressing that you want to ask, feel free to interrupt. I built time in for that in the presentation, so please jump in. Now, one of the things that before we kick off, I have one rule on all of the presentations I give, and that is come in with an open mind. I described this, one of my college professors did this to me as a kid, and I really appreciated it. He had a full glass of water. I don't have a full glass of water. There's too many electronics around me. And he took a big pitcher of water and kept dumping water into the cup, and it just started overflowing. And he explained to me that your mind is like this cup. And if it's already full, there's no room for anything else to come in. And so for today, I can't promise you the content is going to be better than what you're already doing. I can't promise you that it's going to be this life-changing event. What I hope to do is give a little bit different of a perspective. And at the end, we're going to do a little exercise to help you try it on. And if it fits, keep it. If it doesn't, ask me where we can change it a little bit and adjust it to your situation. With that said, I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to start talking about this unicorn. And in sales, I hear it all the time. I hear it at almost every conference I've spoken at and attended over the years, which is you've just got to find the right talent. Go find that magical person, and without the magical person, you're in trouble. And a lot of times these days it's referred to as a unicorn. And I come from a process and data background. It's just ingrained into me, much like Beth was pointing out my poor backgrounds. When there's lack of processes, it just comes out of me, and lack of data, it comes out of me. And what I've seen repeatedly in most of my clients and most of my, my colleagues is when we talk about searching for the unicorn, the thing that's really lacking is that underpinning, or the processes, the systems designed to support the people we're hiring. And so today we're going to talk about what those mean and how to support that. And I want to just kick off with why it's so important that we're discussing this. Now, I do have sources for all of these, and I will send all of this information out to Beth afterwards for distribution. But on average right now, a new senior sales hire, including sales leaders, hits their sales quota about 35% of the time. That hurts. 35% of the time, we have a hire that is hitting the targets that we believe and planned for. The average tenure of a senior salespeople, including sales leader, is 15 months. Now, most of our sales cycles in service world, most of the times that it takes to really enact change is longer than 15 months. So when we're talking about the failure rate of these senior sales leaders, it is through the roof. And it is really unfortunate. And that's That's really why On Purpose Growth was built, because these hires really cost the company. And what really scares me is the way it costs the company. Now, HR and a couple of my HR colleagues have told me that a bad hire wastes 20% of their salary. And that's a fair amount of money. But when you think about it in sales, what it takes to recapture that 20% you lost, that is listed down here in the table below. So we're going to take just that middle range, probably a higher, middle range to higher end sales leader, which is 150,000 base plus some commission and some reasonable margins, depending on what business you're in, to recapture the loss of that 20% are these numbers down here. So if it's $150,000 salary and you're at 10% margins, you need $300,000 in sales to recapture that money. That's a lot. And that's a lot of effort to just recapture from searching for the unicorn. And most of the time when On Purpose Growth is brought in, or when we're hearing the horror stories, it's not one or two or three bad hires. It's a continuing trend. And when you bring in a senior salesperson, a sales leader, a lot of times you lose the people underneath as well. And the damage that this does is really exponential, not cumulative. And so what we're going to talk about is, how do we really change this? How do we go in and dig in and stop needing to sell more and more and more to make up for some of our mistakes? This, to me, is one of the scariest things that was shown to me when we talk about missing on a sales hire. Now, I don't want to leave us on a bad note, and I think this is the question that I get asked the most, which is, when we hire and we think we're hiring an A player, but why do they always turn out to be C players? And I always ask the question back of, why do you keep hiring C players? They say, well, we don't. They're A players when we hire them. I said, okay, what do you do in your process that takes that superstar that was successful in other companies and make them a C player in yours? And that's where we get into the nitty gritty. And the question becomes, why do all these unicorns I think I'm hiring turn out to be, I'll use the word, less than unicorns, and less than the magical creatures we think we're hiring? And when we think about it, it really is about what it takes to succeed. And this is a partial list of what it takes to succeed as a sales leader. And this list gets longer and longer the more you think about it. This is a subsample of the things it takes. And very rarely are we interviewing for all of these things. Very rarely do we even know how to interview for all of these things. And keep in mind, we're hiring salespeople. They're really good at telling you about all of these things. Trust me, I majored in the art of the interview for probably the first 5-6 years of my career. The first sale I learned how to make was at an interview. And that's really what salespeople these days have gotten really good at, because the systems aren't in place to support them. Now, I'm not here to dog on the individuals. I really don't think this is an individual problem. I don't think we have a people problem. I think we have a process and a system problem. Most small businesses, most entrepreneurs, most CEOs of those $50 million in down business don't have the time and the structure to really build out a successful sales organization. You all on this phone call have been successful because you're a product matter expert, you know your clients really well, and you busted your hump. You wouldn't have started your business if you didn't have the entrepreneur mindset, the problem-solving mindset, the leadership mindset, all of that built in. So often what is said is, I just need another me. Well, there's a problem with that. If you find another you, they've probably started their own business. They're probably out there on your own, and we call them, where I'm from, competition. And it's really hard to hire a CEO to be your sales leader. And even if you do succeed at that, generally there's now leadership issues because you're fighting with them. I do say EOS does help with a lot of those. However, sometimes those people don't stay very long, and it's a tough thing. And so that brings me up to what do we do about it? If we can buy into the idea and we can empty our cup a little bit from the idea that we need this magical person, the question becomes, what do we do? How do we move forward in a way that allows us to have a higher probability of success with our hires? And I'm going to talk a little bit about this foolproof one first. And the foolproof one, what I'm trying to say is not make it easy, but make it simple to follow the steps that are laid out. Document the steps that you use to go from 0 to your first 5 clients, from your first 5 clients to your first 50 clients, and understand the steps that you went through in that process. Now, as a CEO, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you did a lot of scrambling in those first couple clients. I guarantee it. You did a lot of, man, I had this presentation going in, they threw this curveball at me, but because I'm an expert, I was able to adjust. Your sales leaders aren't going to come in being able to do that. They just don't have the same knowledge as you. They don't have the same skill set as you, and they don't have the same authority to make those changes. So when we talk foolproof, what we talk about is 2 things. And I'm going to show you a sheet here in a second that has all of these listed out, and we're going to distribute it at the end. But it's a compelling process. And what I mean by compelling process is if you've gone through all the way from first meeting to closed deal, and you've highlighted the value that you are delivering to your prospects at each stage. You've understood what makes it compelling for that prospect to work with you. And notice I said work with you, because even though they haven't signed a check, even though they haven't signed a contract, the second that that sales process starts, they are already making investments. They're making investments of their time, of their focus, of their curiosity, of their team's investigation. There's a whole list of asks that you as a salesperson, you as a CEO, you as a client trying to close a prospect now have. And those asks have to come with a compelling reason for your prospect to invest. So the first thing that we have to do if you want to have a sales hire, leader, senior leader, any of those people work is a foolproof, compelling reason to continue through your process. Now, I did highlight there the word sales process. This process has to be detailed out and it has to be compelling. If you don't have that, you really do need a unicorn and your probability of success goes down. Before I move on from that, I do want to take a pause and see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns, because we've heard a lot about sales process out there. Sales process is a very common thing. And if anyone has any questions right now, good time to ask. I'll open it up to the field and see if anyone has any comments yet.
Jeff, I was just going to ask, when you talk about the foolproof, are you kind of going to EOS language? Is that really talking about articulating the 3 uniques? The 3 uniques in terms of, like when you talk about your prospects, investing their time, investing their resources, like it's really well articulating the 3 uniques. Am I understanding that correctly?
Shannon, that's a great question. I appreciate you jumping in. That was my second point of this 2-part process, the compelling process. And then the second point is those 3 uniques. And so the unique reason that somebody will jump into your compelling process is that second point of foolproof. So the first is a compelling process that says each step of the way we're delivering value. Point 2 is that you need those 3 uniques for why they choose you over anybody else to work through that process. Make sense? And those 3 uniques should then leak down to that compelling process and be reinforced in each of those steps. You were a great plants there. I really appreciate you getting that message ahead of time to allow me to transition so nicely there. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Are there any other questions, comments, concerns about that foolproof, compelling process? And we're going to talk about a homework assignment here in a little bit to help the leaders build that out for people behind them. Next, we want to understand necessary and sufficient. And before I dive into some details, I really want to start with what understanding necessary and sufficient means. Necessary and sufficient are all of the parts, all of the pieces, all of the steps to take someone from not knowing you all the way through being a happy, delighted client, and not a single extra step. And this is where I think it becomes really important, is that you have to look at necessary and sufficient, not only from your perspective, but from your ideal client's perspective. We have to step back and say, here's all of the information our ideal client needs to know, needs to understand, needs to feel, needs to hear, needs to believe in, and needs to trust to want to sign us a check. On the other side, you need to have all of the necessary and sufficient items for you to be able to serve them, for you to be able to deliver on your brand promise. That all has to happen before that contract gets hit. And those together allow you to detail what a sales system and a sales process should be. If you don't have those two items, you're necessary and sufficient, your prospect's necessary and sufficient, it's next to impossible to create a compelling process, a foolproof process. And this takes a lot of work. And what I mean by that is, so often what we as experts, and I use we loosely, I'll say you as experts need to know, is the idea that what you believe is important is not nearly as important as what the client or prospect believes is important. And understanding from their perspective what they, and I use these words very deliberately, what they need to see, hear, and feel through that process is really important. And most entrepreneurs I know, most CEOs I know, most leaders I know do this pretty inherently, that they feel the moment and they adjust to the moment, and they're working with their prospects in a way that they know because they've done it countless times. They also know no one's going to yell at them if they make a mistake. Maybe your significant other when that check doesn't come in, but that's not the same. And that both that inherent knowledge and that lack of fear allows the leaders to adjust in ways your sales leaders can't. So making sure you have documented all of this and making sure you're training your team on all of this is the way to increase probability, is the way to take it from a unicorn to a wider range of people that would succeed. Because when we're talking unicorn, you're asking that person to have the same inherent knowledge and skill and confidence that you do, as opposed to what's more realistic is there's going to be some gaps there, including that confidence gap. And not enough people are thinking about that confidence gap of, I'm working for someone else, I need to perform, otherwise I'm out. We need to acknowledge all of that and make sure we're building that into our training. Does that all make sense? And in a second, I'm going to jump over to our list of necessary and sufficient to give you guys an example of just a broad general version of this. And at the end of this, we're going to go through an exercise to help you guys come up with your own. The last thing I'm going to say here is this all starts with you. And the exercise we're going to do against our necessary and sufficient, it starts with you. It starts with the entrepreneur, the leader. And what I mean by that is the expectation shouldn't be that you're bringing someone in to replace everything you do in the sales, everything that you do in the marketing world. It's too hard to do. It's next to impossible to do. And instead, what you want to think of is a timeline for that person to go from coming in to take these few tasks, then after a while, take the next few, then the next few, and develop him into the seats on the bus and the accountability charts that you guys have developed. But it's not a hire day one, go. And when we say it starts with you, it means you have to become very self-reflective, understand your strengths, your weaknesses, and what you want to hand off versus what you can hand off versus what you should hand off versus what you want to keep. And all of that goes into this idea of building out a process from hire to successfully taking over the sales system. Now, in a second, I'm going to pull up the necessary and sufficient that we have that we work on. Before I do that, any questions on these three things that I believe are absolutely necessary to do before we start the hiring process? And I emphasize before that hiring process very intentionally, because if you don't do this before you bring someone on, now you're chasing your tail a little bit. Terrific. Get ready, because we're about to do some homework as soon as I figure out how to split my share here, change my share screen. Everybody seeing the white graphic with attract, engage, and convert on it? Thumbs up. Awesome. So we break this down into two big chunks. The first being attract. To have a successful sales process, you have to be able to attract the right type of prospect to your system, to your process. Once you've attracted them, you have to have a way to engage and convert. Engage meaning get meaningful time, meaningful conversation, meaningful back and forth, and convert meaning take them from a prospect who's squeezing you for free information and free work to convert them to a high-paying, high-profit client. And in each one of these, we have some very broad, very general checkboxes. The first being that I want to highlight here is this idea of ideal client profile. Now, everyone's heard of this. It's become really popular in the last few years. But I'd be willing to bet that almost everyone on this call has too broad of an ideal client profile. Specifically too broad of an ideal client profile when you're bringing on a new sales leader. The more narrow and the more focused you can have an ideal client profile when you're bringing in a new sales hire, the faster they will be able to close new deals. And sometimes what that means is the sales leader takes on a smaller chunk of the prospecting and sales efforts until they get comfortable with that niche. And then they can slowly spread out. Give me a thumbs up if that made a little sense. So the more narrow that we can get in this ideal client profile, specifically for what we're handing the new sales leader, the better off we are. Now, we talked about here at the bottom, the 3 uniques that EOS helps you with, and I'm a huge believer in those. I'm a huge believer in that process, and I'm a huge believer in the importance of that process. And what I want to highlight is taking this one step further is how those 3 uniques solve an important problem for your prospect. And this is where I see a lot of entrepreneurs fall down when bringing people in. Almost all business owners, leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs inherently know and started their business based on a gap in the marketplace, based on a pain that they experienced, based on a pain that someone around them experienced. They started the process that way, so they inherently know and can talk to that important problem you solve. What gets lost as you hire people and bring people on is the focus on that important problem. So what you need to do is take those 3 uniques and translate that into very specific and very identifiable problems that those uniques solve. And I'm going to overuse a word, uniquely. And the better that we can do in niching those out, and the better we tie that to the ideal client profile, the easier this attract piece becomes, the easier you can talk about it. This is one thing EOS has done extraordinarily well, specifically from their corporate office in EOS. They have identified a very tight window of entrepreneurs they want to work with. They've mastered the marketing towards the problems and the very specific issues. And Gino Wickman hits the road and talks about those things very articulately. I don't want to move off this important problem if anyone has any questions, because this is one of the areas that getting your salespeople on board with and getting your marketing people on board with is something that I all too commonly see missing from the sales system, is identifying the problems that it solves, those unique solve. Awesome. I'll take that as... Oh.
Sorry, Jeff, I was just going to jump in. When you started off by saying the ideal client profile is usually too broad, Can you give an example of like what a really broad target profile is? Or, I mean, I'm even happy to share what ours is and you can tell me if it's broad, if anybody in the group, like, I don't know. I'm
Let's hear it. I like this.
okay. So our ideal client profile is entrepreneurs between $2 and $10 million in revenue of service-based organizations. They're stuck, frustrated, or embarrassed by their finances, and they're not getting the information that they need. Part of the problem is they don't know what that information is, but they just know that they're not getting the right information to make the right decisions for their business.
Awesome. So a couple things as we work through this that I would challenge you on.
Yeah.
So as a sales leader coming in, they may or may not be able to get the conversations where CEOs and entrepreneurs are comfortable sharing that they're not getting the data that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly can't identify that early on before you have some level of trust.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one of my first concerns, is that when we talk ideal client profile, we really want things that are identifiable even before. Now,
sorry. I was just going to say, so where we always start off is those entrepreneurs of service-based businesses between $2 and $10 million in revenue.
and
Is that too broad?
yeah, I would argue that it is, but it depends on, there's a lot of depends here in this. So how many salespeople do you have out beating the roads? How many different niches can these individual salespeople focus on? As an individual salesperson, I would say that that is too broad, because it leaves you on any given day going too wide and not being able to develop an authority. One of the things that we tell people is as you get, and you're going to see this later in the presentation, the idea should be when we're prospecting and targeting these things is less but better. And when we talk about ideal client profile, everyone's always afraid of missing out. And missing out on, oh my God, there's an opportunity over in construction. Oh my God, there's an opportunity over in manufacturing. Oh my God, there's an opportunity over in any of these other areas. And what I tell people there is you really want to focus on less but better. If you say across all of those industries, it's going to be very hard to build, as a small business, to build an identifiable brand and authority. Whereas if you took that down and said, we're going to focus, and I think you said service businesses.
Service-based businesses. So we do have 5 kind of categories of that, but yeah.
Yeah, and if you take that and you take that down and each salesperson focuses, you have a chance then to really hone in and develop authority and brand within a small niche. And I'll give you guys a great example. There's a gentleman by the name of Steve Fretzen here in Chicago. And Steve Fretzen is a great guy, and he did something really intelligently, which is he decided to take sales training and consulting and focus only on lawyers. Now, Steve Fretzen's sales training could work for any entrepreneur. He's a great sales coach. He can do it with anybody. But Steve Fretzen took off because he was smart enough to focus on a very small niche. Now, at the start, I'm guessing he had all the same trepidation we all do, which is, oh God, I'm missing out on those other. But I can tell you, you can't talk to a lawyer that doesn't know Steve Fretzen. And there's power in that. And as a sales trainer, coach, strategist that came along much after Steve, I'm jealous that he got there first and had that great idea. It was a really phenomenal step for him to take, and it's grown his business by saying no to so much and yes to very little. He's become that authority. And I really do push people to make that trade-off, because here's the trade-off. You can know your finances and know what information to show them. But if you don't know their language from a business standpoint, and if you don't know the players, and if they don't know your brand, that trade-off is very real. By going broad, you lose the brand authority. Does that make sense? And so that's when we talk very narrow ideal client profile. That's what we talk about. It is a trade-off game. That's a strategy question, and strategy questions become trade-offs, specifically for new hires. Because I want everyone to think about this for new hires and new sales leaders as they develop their sales enablement material. Now you don't have to develop one set of material, you have to develop 10 sets of material. And that takes longer, and it doesn't get as deep. As a new sales leader, you don't get to know the network as well. You don't get to have those relationships as deep because on Monday, I'm focused on this niche. I think you said you had 5 categories. That's one for each day of the week. And maybe over the course of a year, it gets there. And I don't know your business well enough to say this is a great idea, but that's where I would be investigating. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Perfect.
Now that moves us over to this engage and convert. And what I'm talking about is this compelling process. And I want to focus in here. And there's 3 things that we always talk about. And the first one is often looked over. Is it convenient? Is your sales process easy to engage with? Have you made it simple and convenient for your prospects to move through the line? And this is a hard one. If you were a prospect, how much time do you want to invest in a vendor? I want to do my research, but I want to invest as little as possible until I make my decision. And that comes to the second thing. These 2, convenient and delivers value, are kind of that seesaw. The more convenient you make it, the less value you have to deliver. The less convenient you make it, the more value you have to deliver. Does that make sense? And you know that you have a compelling process because it increases efficiency and effectiveness. You should be able to measure each step of the process. And obviously that last step goes on your scorecard, which is sales. And this is necessary and sufficient before you hire someone. Now, a lot of people tell me that's why I'm hiring someone, is to have them come in and do this. And the question that I then ask is, you want someone to come in that doesn't know your business, that doesn't have the client expertise you do, doesn't have the background with the clients, doesn't understand your market as well as you, to come in and build this out. And if the answer is yes, that's fine, but expect it to take 18 to 24 months. And this is why we try to do this before we bring people in. Now, I told you that you want to make it foolproof. And this is the section where we talk about foolproof. The sales and buyer steps. Are the steps of that compelling process well defined? Do we know a definition of done for each step? Are they repeatable by people that don't have the same expertise that you do? And how easy are they to be repeated? You know, it's almost, I'm guessing all of you have experienced the LinkedIn messages where they connect and then you get a sales pitch maybe 3 seconds later. Those are done because they're highly repeatable and they can do volume. It drives us nuts. And I know people that do this and they tell me, look, I send out 100 of them. I get 1 client. I don't care that I pissed off 99. I choose not to do that, but it's a highly repeatable process that can be outsourced. And so now you think about that scale of how easy is it to repeat in complexity and what expertise. And that's what we really want to spell out. If you don't have knowledge of how repeatable it is and the complexity, we haven't done our job yet in that process. Does that all make sense as we go through what I mean by a foolproof process now? I hope that helped you clarify the 3 uniques versus the process. Terrific. Now I will share this sheet with your guys' EOS professionals, implementers, right after this, and they can distribute. With this, we have an assessment that we'll be happy to. Your EOS implementers have badgered me and crushed me in negotiation, so we'll be happy to give this negotiation to you, for this assessment to you for free. It's a simple online Google form, and we'll send you back some results. And if you guys want to have a conversation, we're happy to help. Again, this was provided to you guys by those EOS implementers that you're here for today. So let's jump back over. Let's see if I can do this as smoothly as I did the first time. I think I did. Back to the presentation. So now, as we talked about what foolproof is, what understanding necessary and sufficient means, now we need to know what it means that it starts with you. And this is where that less but better. Does everybody have a piece of paper or something they can write on? Because this now starts with you. And I want you to think about the top 3 to 5, and if you're really aggressive, 10 things that you believe you're really good at teaching from a sales process, sales system, some of the stuff we just talked about, some of the stuff that's vital to your sales process. Think about the things that you can really teach, train, and develop in your hire, in your team. And Beth, I promise I'm watching the time. I know I'm running up against it here, so we can still have some Q&A.
No worries.
Now, as you've gotten that list, I want you to draw a line right down to the right of it. And just to the right of that line, think about the 3 to 5 things that you have no shot of teaching and training and developing in others. And if you can't come up with 3 to 5, we're going to talk about some self-awareness. I have a team here at On Purpose Growth, and they ended up sending me a clip from the TV show Schitt's Creek, where the mom is trying to teach the son how to cook. And he's putting cheese in it. She's like, just fold it in. He's like, I don't know what that means. She just keeps saying, fold it in. And for the life of me, I didn't know what they were trying to tell me. But these are the things that you struggle to develop in others. And then this last column, I want one more column. I want 3 things you love to focus on in the sales process and 3 things you hate to focus on in the sales process. Now, what we're trying to do here is the idea of less but better. And if you focus on the things that are in that middle column, which are the things that you can't develop and train in others, and you focus on the things that you don't want to do, and that's who you look for in your hires. Look for less qualifications, because you can't train, teach, and develop these in others. We need them to come with those pre-baked. And then you develop your process about what you can train on, and look for, you're okay with hiring someone with those gaps. Now you're going to find less prospects, less volume of leaders, less dollars spent on finding those leaders, but they're going to be better suited to your organization. Does that make sense? How we, and this, I know we just did this in about 35 seconds. This should take some thought. You want to expand and invest in this. But the idea here is that if you focus your efforts on qualifying for the things you can't train and develop on, and focus your other effort on the thing and focus on developing where you can train and develop on, you'll have a higher likelihood of success with your hires. Now, here's where the magic comes in. If you compare your list to the necessary and sufficient, you now know where your gaps are. And you now can say, this is where we really have to invest in so that we have the highest probability of building a sales system for people to come in and succeed. Now, I'm going to share a couple things with the EOS implementers, and they'll send them out to you. I believe you guys captured everyone's email addresses. I'm going to share that necessary and sufficient sheet, this presentation, and a link to an assessment that just does a quick job of saying where your weak points are in that necessary and sufficient. And from this, you can now look at saying, okay, this is where we marked ourselves as weak. We should spend and invest in those areas. Before we get to general Q&A, anything specific on the exercise that we just did to help you hone in on where you should be looking to qualify for skills? Awesome.
I have a quick question, Jeff. So can you just, so that, like, what do you typically see here in these columns? What jumps out at you most of the time?
Almost invariably, I see a couple things. One, there's a higher level of belief in people's ability to train and develop on the product knowledge. So we know our products, we know our services, we can train and develop on those. There is, it depends on where the entrepreneur came from, whether there's a market and strategy ability to train, or if it's a sales system training or sales skills. But almost invariably what we see in that middle ground, especially if they came talking to us, is we're not ready to build out that compelling process. We're not really ready to build out those buyer steps and things of that nature. And by the way, that's going to be a very biased survey because that's usually who comes looking for us. But what I generally see is the CEO has a specific expertise, and that expertise generally falls in the lane that they can train and develop on. Now, what I will say is that it takes time and effort to develop a process for getting that out of the entrepreneur's head and getting it into a way that other people can hear it. And that's hard. My brother Matt was a math genius. Drove me crazy. He was off the charts intelligent in math. I was more along the average line, and my mom would always make him tutor me. He's 4 years older than me, and he looked, I'm trying to learn algebra, and Matt's just looking at me and saying, just do it. What are you talking about? Just do it. And so it's hard for experts to make it foolproof. And that's where I see a lot of challenges coming in as well.
So Jeff, it's interesting. I think a lot of people spend an awful lot of time training and developing on product and services because I think that's easy and they're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the training piece on, hey, it's a process and here's how you can be really, really good at every step of the process. Is that where you see the breakdown?
So we look at that a little differently. The answer is yes, by the way, to be direct and not be as verbose as I normally am. The answer is yes. And what we tend to do when we try to implement that type of training is not making it a event-based training, but tying it into the sales pipeline meetings and the daily stand-ups and reinforcing the knowledge of those steps through real life problems. So in your sales pipeline, you're going to tend to bring up a client and what has to happen next in that client to close that client. That's the time to reinforce some of those processes. And that's where a lot of people, especially CEOs that are running the sales team, tend to lack. Because the question, why hasn't this person already closed yet? Rather than saying, okay, here's the step. Did we get this information out of them in this step? Oh, no, we didn't. Okay, we need to go back to that step. And that detail oriented. And I think I remember talking in our conversation previously, one of the things that I tell people is include some ops people on that sales pipeline call, because they can be really, really helpful in teaching that pipeline and that process management. Beth, I think I can turn it back over to you now. That was my presentation. I think I'm right on time.
Okay. I wasn't sure that you were done, but that's awesome. So what kind of questions do we have from people? If there were an issues list here that we could, put your issues on a whiteboard, what would they be when it comes to sales?
So here's one for you, Jeff. How many great salespeople have you met that you just think, hey, that guy was a born salesman, when really it wasn't a born salesman, it's just somebody that did the hard work and figured it out?
This is a question that after every conference I've ever been at, when you're sitting around the table drinking with all the sales leaders, the sales guys, the sales women, this comes up all the time. And the answer is I've never seen a born salesperson. And what people confuse is those people, much like my daughter, negotiate bedtime from the time they're 4 years old. And then they negotiate playtime. Then they negotiate at the store when they want a toy. And it's one of those things that they actually practice. It's just not identified as practice. And the more you dig into it, the more there's that. However, the people that I see that are not only successful at one company, but the salespeople that have many successful career stops are the ones that are able to identify a process and the critical factors in each step of those process that allows them to succeed. And the ironic thing that I see is that they generally can identify those critical factors within the first 30, 45 days.
So I have a question. When it comes to process and sales people in general, there's kind of a general idea that salespeople don't like to follow process, that they're more relationship based, and that they just default to, being friendly or taking people out to lunch, and I got my own thing that I do. So how do you get around that?
I usually yell, scream, kick, and fight. No, that does become tough. And it's the idea, a lot of what I see when people are pushing back on process and measurement is that the lack of wanting to be accountable.
Right.
And where those salespeople tend to be really good at is negotiating for the best accounts that are already in-house rather than going out and being able to find and close new deals. Now, with that said, there is a level of relationship building that has to go into sales. It's the ability to develop trust. It's one of the, do people buy from people they like or they trust? And the answer is it's not an either or. You tend to trust people that you like more. And it's faster to trust people that you like. With that said, as a company, it's easier to manage and grow and develop that in more people when there's a process. And so I refer to this as do I want one superstar on my team, or do I want a team that plays together? And I'll take the team that plays together because they outproduce an individual all day long. And I'd rather have 6 A- players rather than the one superstar. And I can't get that when there's one superstar. So I'm not taking away from the idea that there's the relationship building and there's people that are really, really special at it. I just don't believe that when you're in a group environment and a team environment that you can treat people with such different levels of accountability and responsibility.